Hey everyone, and welcome to a video I've been wanting to make for a while. The Ghostbusters franchise features some of the most unique poltergeists, monsters, and demons in all of fiction. And the best part about them is that because of Dan Aykroyd's love of the paranormal, each of the ghosts in the franchise have their own classifications and backgrounds. So I'm going to go through each and every one of the entities throughout the Ghostbusters franchise and explain their classifications, backgrounds, and histories. And for this video, I'm going to start with the original two movies, and I'll follow this up with ghosts from the video game and eventually Afterlife. And another side note, a lot of this information comes from either the comics, the RPG, or the video game. But before we begin, I should start by explaining the classification, description, and identification system, or CDI system. There are 7 classes of ghosts. Class 1s are undeveloped forms and often hard to see or interact with. These include spectral lights and disembodied voices. Class 2s actually have somewhat of a form and can physically manipulate things in our world. These include things like floating bedsheets and ghostly hands. Class 3s and 4s are pretty similar. Class 3s are ghosts with a distinct human form and personality, however, if their pre-death identity is discovered, then they are automatically reassigned to Class 4. Class 5s are ectoplasmic manifestations with a non-human form. This includes the Slimers and other more monstrous ghosts. Class 6s are entities with a physical body. These are often less intelligent and more animalistic compared to other ghosts. And finally, we have Class 7s, which are your gods, demons, and other extremely powerful entities. So now that we have all the classes of ghosts established, let's get on with the ghosts of Ghostbusters 1. The very first ghost the Ghostbusters ever encountered was the Grey Lady, or better known as the Librarian Ghost. She is a Class 4 full-torso floating apparition, and she also has a pretty extensive history. She was once known as Eleanor Twitty, the head librarian at the New York Public Library. She also curated the library's Special Collections exhibit, which featured ancient artifacts, stone tablets, and other historical findings. She eventually met and was seduced by a man named Edmund Hoover, aka the Collector, who used her to acquire rare books for his collection. She eventually discovered what he was doing and promptly dumped him, however this caused him to kill her in a secret room in the basement of the library. Also, it turns out that Hoover was caught up in a Gozerian cult, but I'll talk about that in another video. Anyway, Hoover was eventually arrested and hanged for his crimes, and Eleanor became a ghost tethered to the library she was murdered in. As stated previously, she met the Ghostbusters for the first time in 1984, and we all know how that turned out. However, they did return in 1991 to investigate a psychokinetic disturbance coming from the library. Spoiler alert, the disturbance was coming from the ghost of the Collector. Eleanor saw what was happening and subtly led the Ghostbusters to the secret room where she was killed and allowed herself to be trapped. The room also contained a portal to the ghost world where the Ghostbusters were able to destroy the Collector, so in the end, it seemed like Eleanor got her revenge. Next up, we have possibly the most famous Ghostbusters ghost, Slimer. Slimer is a Class 5 full roaming vapor. He's the result of a Gozerian cult experiment gone wrong. Their goal was to summon a hungry spirit that would cripple the American food supply, however, instead they got Slimer, who was too lazy to ever leave the Sedgwick Hotel, the place he was summoned in. After that, they just left him there, and he built up a reputation among the hotel staff that constantly tried to hide his existence from the public. Eventually, it was too much for the hotel, and they called the Ghostbusters. We all know what happens from here, but after the second movie, possibly due to how friendly he was with Louis Tully, the Ghostbusters tried to domesticate Slimer. And depending on which continuity you go off of, Slimer has continued to be both a constant friend and foe to the Ghostbusters. Next is the Dream Ghost, which yes is a real ghost and not just a part of Ray's dream. She is a Class 4 Remnant ghost. She used to be the girlfriend of a military officer in the 1800s. She was actually a part of a deleted scene that showed Ray and Winston investigating an old military base, and the Dream Ghost appeared from a closet. After further studies conducted by Ray, he determined that the ghost was not a threat. Next is the Subway Ghost, who can be seen in the montage near the end of the film. He is a Class 5 full roaming vapor. Not much is known about the origins of this particular ghost, however it shares many similarities with the average ghosts you can spot in the ghost world. So presumably he's just a random ghost who managed to find a portal into our world. Next up is the Zombie Taxi Driver Ghost. He is a Class 3 corporeal inhabiting ghost. There have been multiple theories about his origin. One states that he was originally an electric carriage driver in the 1800s and ran a service that predated the taxi drivers of the modern day. Another theory suggests that he was a casualty of an incident in the 1950s where a taxi cab crashed into the Harlem River. However, what we do know about him is that he can only manifest his physical form whenever he's in a taxi. Next, let's talk about Zuul and Vince Clortho, Gozer's terror dogs. They are both Class 7 transdimensional possessors. Zuul and Vince were loyal servants of Gozer and were necessary for the ritual of bringing Gozer into our dimension. Zuul was known as the Gatekeeper and Vince was the Keymaster. Not much is known of their origin, however they are presumed to be thousands of years old at the least. They've helped bring Gozer into multiple dimensions for their destruction, however they ultimately died when the Ghostbusters defeated Gozer for the first time in 1984. As for how they're alive in Ghostbusters Afterlife, I'll talk about that when I make the Afterlife video, since they and Gozer work slightly differently in that movie. And to cap off the first movie, we need to talk about Gozer the Gozerian, aka the Traveler, aka the Destructor. Gozer is a Class 7 trans-dimensional deity. As stated previously, Gozer has been responsible for the destruction of countless worlds. To do this, it has the inhabitants of the world choose their own form of destruction. Some of Gozer's previous forms include a Torb, a giant muscular tadpole-looking thing, and a Slor, a giant fish-like creature. However, this is actually a weakness of Gozer, because if somebody were to choose a weaker form for it, then Gozer would be forever stuck in that form for as long as it's in the dimension. And that's exactly what happened when she came to the Ghostbusters dimension. Ray accidentally chose the form of Stay Puft, which didn't have the destructive capabilities that Gozer was hoping for. So years later, when the ghost of Ivo Shandor resurrected Gozer, it was still stuck in the Stay Puft form and was again quickly defeated by the Ghostbusters. Though it is still possible that Gozer is still alive somehow. And again, I know, Ghostbusters Afterlife, but as I said before, they changed the rules of Gozer in that movie, so I'll explain everything in another video. So now, we can move on to Ghostbusters 2. Let's not waste any time. To start, let's talk about the Scoleri brothers. They are Class 4, full-torso, free-roaming apparitions. Nunzio, the fat one, and Tony, the skinny one, were brothers and convicted murderers who were sentenced to death by electric chair. When they were alive, they were actually a part of a criminal organization run by their mother, Mama Scoleri. She would end up committing suicide after learning of her son's sentencing. They were able to come back into our world after the judge who sentenced him, Judge Stephen Wexler, gave some nearby pink slime enough negative energy to conjure them. Of course, the Ghostbusters would end up catching them both. Next is the Jogger Ghost. He's a Class 3 Remnant who can be seen aggressively running through Central Park. His pre-death identity is unknown, however due to the fact that he can be seen checking his pulse, it's possible that he died from a heart attack while running. This ghost was an easy one for the team to trap, as all they had to do was wait for him to run over it. So the next entity up is the disembodied voice heard when Winston shouted hello in the sewers. So, if this is just the voice, then this is an easy Class 1 identification. However, some fans believe that this voice could be coming from Vigo, and if so, I'll get to him later. So after that, we have the impaled heads who could be seen right after hearing the voice. There's little to no information available about these guys, but it seems like they just act as a scarecrow to ward people away from the river of slime. If that's the case, they're simply a very weak Class 2 entity. So for this one, I actually wanted to group two things together, the Ghost Train and the Titanic. Both are very similar in nature. First, let me start with history. The Ghost Train was originally the New York Central City of Albany, which derailed in 1920, killing hundreds. And the Titanic was, well, the Titanic. So for classification, the vehicles themselves are considered Class 2, while all the ghosts within would be Class 3s and 4s. There's also a possibility that the ghost train mentioned by the reporter in Ghostbusters 1 could be the same train seen in 2.
Stories around the campfire. Heck, my grandma used to spin yarns about a spectral locomotive that would rocket past the farm where she grew up.
Next up is the theater ghost. This one is very similar to the subway ghost from the first movie. It even has the same exact classification, that being a Class 5 full roaming vapor. Again, like the subway ghost, it is very likely that this is just a standard Ghost World ghost who found a way into our dimension. However, this time we know how it got here, and it was because of the pink slime. So next entity up is the mink coat. By the way, if you don't know, minks are the aquatic version of weasels or ferrets. Anyway, this lady had a mink fur coat, and after stepping in a puddle of pink slime, the minks attacked her out of revenge before running out into the city. As for classification, these would fall under Class 2. For our second to last ghost, we have the Washington Square Ghost, or as I like to call him, the Rancor Ghost. This one-legged beast is a Class 5 full torso apparition. This is a unique one as not many ghosts are this big. Pretty much nothing is known about this guy, but if I had to guess, he's just another Ghost World native summoned by Vigo. Which brings me to our final entity, Vigo the Carpathian. Vigo is a powerful Class 7 full-torsoed telekinetic anchored entity. Vigo was born in 1505 and was the Prince of Carpathia. It was said that he possessed magical abilities and was a brutal and unforgiving ruler. He was eventually killed at the age of 105 after being poisoned, shot, stabbed, hung, stretched, disemboweled, and drawn and quartered.
Ouch.
After he died, his spirit possessed a painting of him which he had commissioned years before his demise. He wouldn't be able to do anything, however, until his painting was moved to the Manhattan Museum of Art. That museum was built presumably by Ivo Shandor over a river of pink slime which was being pumped from Shandor Island. Because of the constant negative energy that New York produced, Vigo finally had enough power to start his master plan, to possess a baby and become a human again. Of course, this all ended in Vigo's defeat at the hands of the Ghostbusters, however he would return to his painting again, albeit depowered. Actually, shortly after his defeat, he was transported to the Plains of Oblivion where he met the Dragonborn and— okay, just kidding, but you should watch that video. And there we have it, every ghost featured in Ghostbusters 1 and 2. Oh, and before anyone says anything, that Janusz ghost that captured Oliver in 2 isn't a ghost, it's just Janusz. Vigo just gave him some astral projection powers in order to do that. And like I said before, I will be following this video up with one explaining each of the ghosts in the video game, and one talking about the afterlife ones. But other than that, thanks for watching. Remember to like it if you liked it, subscribe if you really liked it, and I'll see you next time.